Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellowshow. I'm your host, theFellowKGB. You can follow me on Twitter at theFellowKGB. And we're continuing our AFC South fantasy previews for each team. We just covered the Colts and the Houston Texans, and now I'm going to be looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just want to say, if you're listening on any of the podcasting platforms that we're on, I highly recommend checking us out on YouTube. That's where I do the screen shares. And you just get a little bit more value there as you can see what I'm looking at as I talk through it. And let's hop into the 2020 Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm just on the fantasyfellowship.com. I'm going to filter here by the team tab and click on the Jaguars. Head coach Doug Marrone, new offensive coordinator Jay Gruden, and defensive coordinator Todd Wash. Is that his real name, Todd Wash? I'm not really sure if that's supposed to be Washington or not. But anyways, we got some continuity here in Jacksonville. Doug Marrone's been there for a while. He's been through it's his third offensive coordinator in the last 3 years. So Jay Gruden comes in from Washington. He's going to have a heavy influence on this team, and we'll see what he can do with the running backs and the wide receivers and the tight ends. That has me excited for those guys. It has me excited for Gardner Minshew. So let's just look at the quarterback room here. Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, who they signed, Josh Dobbs, they traded for him last year, and then I think they drafted Jake Luton. Yep, with the 6th round pick, Jake Luton out of Oregon State. But they're giving Gardner Minshew a trial here to see if he can do anything or if they need to draft a quarterback next year. So it's going to be all about Minshew. Minshew was very impressive last year. As we look here on FF today, Gardner Minshew ended up finishing as quarterback 20 on a points per game basis, though he was pretty solid. He ended up being, I guess, quarterback 19 on a points per game basis. So Minshew does have quarterback 2 super flex value for us, and I think he could be a little bit higher this year. He offers a good amount of rushing upside. He had 67 rushing attempts last year for 344 yards, 0 touchdowns. I'd be willing to bet he gets a touchdown or 2 in the column this year. And then we see just over 3,000 passing yards, 21 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. The offense was much more efficient with him in the game versus Nick Foles. I guess Nick Foles had a better completion percentage, but the offense looked better, and Minshew was able to push the ball down the field a little bit more successfully with Chris Conley and DJ Chark alike. So I like what Minshew brings to the table in terms of rushing upside. This team's going to be a losing team. They're going to be lucky to get 4 or 5 wins this year. They could surprise some people, but everything's against Jacksonville this year. The defense is going to be atrocious. It basically is going to be a ton of negative game scripts and a lot of passing, a lot of catch-up mode, and all that basically points to me as this team being a passing team, Gardner Minshew getting a lot of attempts, and I have him up in a lot of my stats. I think he ended up being a top 15 quarterback in my projections just because they're going to be pass-heavy all the time. And he's got a good array of weapons here. With Jay Gruden bringing in his philosophies, we're going to see a good amount of pass catching, I guess a good amount of targets to the running backs, and we're going to see the tight ends involved more usefully. So he did bring in Chris Thompson from Washington to catch passes, and he brought in Tyler Eifert, who is, going back to Cincinnati. So 2 guys familiar with his scheme. And then last year, they really didn't have a tight end that they could use reliably. So I think that's going to help Gardner Minshew out as well among the receivers. So everything about Minshew, I don't like the Jacksonville Jaguars to win a lot of games, but they're going to be passing the ball a lot. So that's why I like Minshew plus his rushing upside. So Minshew he looks good as a quarterback too in Superflex. So don't be afraid to rely on him then. And then he's going to have some quarterback 1 streaming value for most part of the year. So the biggest question here, though, on this team will be the running back Leonard Fournette. He absolutely smashed last year, specifically because of his receiving ability. But if we filter here by PPR leagues, we're going to see Leonard Fournette was the RB7. He had 76 receptions on 100 targets, 522 yards, 0 touchdowns, and he only had 3 touchdowns rushing. So that's the area of concern. But I'd be willing to bet Leonard Fournette's going to have more than 3 touchdowns this year. He's probably looking in the 6 to 8 column. So that's where he can improve. I would imagine his targets and his receptions and his receiving yards come down a bit because of Chris Thompson's presence. But Leonard Fournette's still going to get over 250 carries, probably over 1,000 yards, and then he's going to have a little bit more touchdown upside this year. So I don't know if RB7 is going to be his upside in PPR leagues, but he's got potential to be a top 15 back. So I see him a lot of times beyond RB15 in ADP. So he's a guy that I look to as an RB2 that could potentially bolster your squad, and he could be a top 10 running back this year again. So I don't know, it only took him 15 games to be RB7. So I'm optimistic about Fournette getting better touchdown usage, and maybe his targets come down and his receiving stats come down, but the touchdown correction should be there. So I like Fournette as a fringe, RB2, RB1. And then behind him, we mentioned Chris Thompson, second year of Raquel Armstead, second year Divine Zigbo, and then a couple other guys trying to make the team here. But Chris Thompson, we mentioned him being familiar with Jay Gruden's system. He's going to be a third down back, and he's going to help keep Leonard Fournette healthy. Chris Thompson has PPR value as a bench running back. Maybe he's your RB4 or 5. And if anything happens to Fournette, Chris Thompson's value could see a spike there. Chris Thompson's never going to be the workhorse running back. If something happened to Fournette, it's going to be Armstead or Zigbo getting work in tandem with Chris Thompson. So these guys are more the handcuff, Armstead and a Zigbo to Fournette, but Chris Thompson's value should remain steady throughout the whole season. So I like getting Chris Thompson as one of my last picks in a draft, and then Armstead and a Zigbo. If you do end up taking Fournette, you could take a guy like Armstead or a Zigbo, or just take Chris Thompson and see what happens. But kind of like what we said, though, they're not going to win a lot of games, so I don't really know how much rushing opportunity or upside there is with this team. But Jay Gruden's going to throw the ball to the running backs. He's got Chris Thompson and Leonard Fournette, so he's going to run it through those guys, and we'll see what happens. So let's take a look at the wide receiver room, led by DJ Chark. Last year, DJ Chark put up 73 receptions, 1,008 yards, 8 touchdowns. And he kind of fizzled off at the end of last year, but the whole Jaguars kind of fizzled off at the end of the year. They just kind of seemed disinterested. So we'll see if Chark can grow on this will be his third season. He blew up last year in year 2. So we'll see if this could be a floor for Chark to jump off of. But I like everything about DJ Chark. He's a really good wide receiver 2 option, but he's going to look best on your team as your wide receiver 3. And then you got behind him, you got Chris Conley and Dede Westbrook. Both those guys were usable in fantasy last year. Chris Conley, 47 catches, 775 yards, and 5 touchdowns. It seemed like Minshew liked throwing to him and had a good connection with him on the deep ball. But because of the rookie that they added here, I guess we didn't go to this page. They did add Laviska Shenault Jr. I would imagine Shenault gets a little bit more run than Chris Conley this year. So Conley's numbers are going to come down. He's probably not going to be usable for fantasy this year. So it all points to DJ Chark as being the guy you want to own in the Jacksonville Jaguars passing corp. And then Dede Westbrook, he's not a great slot receiver, but he could get volume where he could be a solid bench player in PPR leagues. But the guy that's got the most upside is Laviska Shenault Jr., who they drafted in the second round out of Colorado, pick 42 overall. Chenault's a very physical receiver. Sometimes he looks like a running back with the ball in his hands. So I would imagine if they put Laviska Shenault in the slot, that could push Dede Westbrook out of a bunch of volume. So it'll be interesting to watch how they deploy Laviska Shenault. He's got good deep speed. He can do almost everything very well. So I'm super interested to see how he starts lining up in training camp and in preseason games. But as far as fantasy at the moment right now, I don't know if I can recommend any of these guys for a redraft. I still like Keelan Cole's game, but it's going to be all about DJ Chark, and then everything else is going to be too boom bust to predict. Some guys trying to make the team, though: C.J. Board, Terry Godwin, Michael Walker, Colin Johnson, and Josh Hammond. They did grab Colin Johnson here out of Texas, so he should be a player that makes the team as the 6th or 7th receiver. But like I said, it's all about DJ Chark, and we'll see how they use Dede Westbrook, Laviska Shenault, and Chris Conley. But if Laviska Shenault stays healthy and he's having a good year, I could see him being the number 2 receiver on this team. And as far as dynasty goes, he could be. I mean, he's going to form a really solid duo with DJ Chark in the future. So I like Laviska's game. Strong physical guy, good with the ball after the catch. And he's a lot of fun to watch. So congrats, Jacksonville, on the selection of Laviska. But let's move to tight ends here. The tight end group was a mess last year. They ended up using 7 different tight ends. No one can stay healthy for longer than like 2 games, it seemed. But Minshew did have some success with tight ends. He did like James O'Shaughnessy when he was healthy. We see 2 touchdowns here. And I don't know. I'm optimistic because of Jay Gruden and Minshew development second year. I think Tyler Eifert has a chance at being a top 15 tight end this year. I mean, Tyler Eifert's always been an injury concern himself, but he did play a full 16-game season last year. So maybe we see him start to shake that injury bug that's always plagued him. But there's really not a lot of competition behind him. And because of the connection with Jay Gruden, Tyler Eifert he's going to get the first chance at running away with the tight end job. So Tyler Eifert's got some upside. He could be a great tight end too for you, and we'll see how that goes. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see Tyler Eifert being the second, third best receiving option on this team. Guys trying to, I guess, backups behind Eifert would be second year Josh Oliver, James O'Shaughnessy is back, and then some guys trying to make the team here. But I don't know, man. I like the core of the Jaguars offense. It's that defense is just going to be so bad where they're not going to be a good team in the record column. But there's enough here to work with, I think, for fantasy. That's why I like Minshew. I do like Leonard Fournette as an RB2 with upside. Chris Thompson can be on your bench in PPR leagues, and then it's all about DJ Chark at the receiver position for redraft. So we'll see if Tyler Eifert can stay healthy and he can produce. But I mean, I got a feeling if Eifert plays a full 16 games, he's going to have 5 or 6 red zone touchdowns. So Jay Gruden's a big piece of this. It's kind of all just a moving piece. So we'll see how Jacksonville kind of handles the poor defense and this new offensive coordinator situation. But I like the core here. They got enough weapons to be competitive, but that defense is not going to be good. So that's just the recipe, I guess, for good fantasy output. So we look at the Jaguars draft real quick here. They did snag defensive heavy the first 2. They had 2 first-round picks. They took C.J. Henderson out of Florida, the cornerback, edge rusher Clavon Chasen out of LSU. And then we see them go to LaVisca. And then round 3, they grabbed defensive tackle Devon Hamilton. So they really, tried to get some plugs at the defense here to help that group. They selected another cornerback here, Josiah Scott. But a really deep class here for the Jaguars. If we look at their notable offseason additions, it was Tyler Eifert, Chris Thompson. That's pretty much it for offense. But the big spend was linebacker Joe Schobert, one of the two. And then Rashawn Melvin down here at corner, Al Woods, Rodney Gunter. So they're trying at the defensive position. It's not going to be a great year for the Jacksonville defense, but I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic about this team as a fantasy offense, and I don't know. It's hard not to root for Minshew, so that's where I'm at with this. But it's going to be a tough division. They're the clear 4th team in this division, but it wouldn't surprise me if they surprise some people this year and end up winning 6, 7 games. And we're a little bit peskier than people thought. So we'll see if the defense can come together. The offensive line, I still know, is a little bit of an issue, but it's all on Jay Gruden and seeing what he can do as an offensive wizard. But yeah, I think that's going to do it today for the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment the video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel as we grow this thing. And thank you for listening on any of the podcasting platforms. Feel free to leave us a rating or a review, whatever you need. And we'll see you in another video. Thanks for listening and watching. Peace.